And if you're curious as to how Trump Tower stacks up against the Burj Khalifa, you would literally need to stack it. Two Trump Towers stacked one on top of the other would give you the approximate height of the Burj Khalifa. I also look up there every time I say that fact, and I still can't believe it. But it's true. Next up, this black box building here on the right is AMA Plaza. Completed in 1972, it was designed by a man named Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. He originated the phrase, less is more, and I think that philosophy is very well represented in that, the largest of his black box modernist buildings. Black box modernism is stark and dark, simple and efficient. We will discuss it later on in the tour, as well as modernism in general. Next up are these corncob-shaped towers out here on the right. These are part of a complex called Marina City, which was designed by a man named Bertrand Goldberg. Now, Bertrand Goldberg believed that buildings should reflect nature, and in his words, there are no right angles in nature. And so we end up with these curvilinear modernist towers. When Marina City was completed in 1968, the downtown was still quite smelly and somewhat industrial, so there wasn't a lot of demand for residences down here. Bertrand Goldberg's solution was a city within a city. This apartment complex featured shops and restaurants, a bowling alley, an ice skating rink, a cinema, which has since become the Chicago House of Blues. There's also, of course, a marina to park your boat and a garage to park your car, valet only for obvious reasons. There aren't enough suspended tennis balls in the world to give me the confidence to park in my garage. See my story from earlier about my neighbor's Ford Bronco. Across the river here on the left, I'm going to highlight a few buildings that I think incorporate time as an interesting architectural quirk. Beginning with 77 West Wacker, this mirrored building with the white stone there on the left. Designed in a style called Neoclassical, 77 West Wacker gets its inspiration from the past. You have neo, which means new, and classical, which references the architecture of the ancient world. In this case, the Greeks, the ancient Greeks. If you look at the top of the building, it looks a lot like the Parthenon up there. Right next to 77 West Wacker is 111 West Wacker, this reflective building with the cutouts going down the side. This building contains patios. Those cutouts contain patios there, and everything below this first patio was originally part of a different building, the Waterview Tower, before construction was halted following the 2008 financial crisis. So the building was abandoned for quite a while, but it was ultimately salvaged. The stone exterior was replaced with reflective glass, and 34 more floors were added to be completed in 2014. So this building gets its foundation, some of its bones, from the past, from a previous building. And if we move 2 doors down, we've got this blocky building with the columns along the top. This is the Builders Building. And the side of the building closest to us here was completed in 1927, but the extension out there on the right was completed in the 1980s, 60 years later. You can see, though, how the designers of the extension honored the original intentions of the building without outright copying it, almost like a call and response through time. So if you've been paying attention, we've got a spark, a start, and a complete piece of art, all plucked from the past and used by designers to inform their present, in what I like to call the quantum collaboration. A lot of layers to some of these buildings. Now up ahead on the river is one of our many fixed trunnion bascule or Chicago-style bridges in the Wells Street Bridge up ahead. Chicago's home to the most movable bridges in North America, 37 in total, and we are number 2 worldwide behind Amsterdam. Both the Wells Street Bridge up ahead and the Lake Street Bridge on the South Branch are double-deck bridges, with the top deck serving our L trains, so-called because the platforms are elevated. So if you're visiting from out of town, keep your cameras at the ready. There is no more Chicago photo of catching the train crossing the river. Looking out here to our right, we're going to talk about this little guy. This 2.5-acre facade belongs to Merchandise Mart. Completed in 1930, it was the largest building in the world until the completion of the Pentagon in 1943. It is an excellent example of Art Deco architecture. It's got long vertical lines, the building's practically wearing pinstripes. It's got deep inset windows to enhance that verticality. And it's got geometric ornamentation. You can see the diamond and chevron patterns along the bottom and along the top of the building. Art Deco has come to represent the opulence and optimism of the 1920s. Merchandise Mart takes up 2 city blocks. It has 7.5 miles of hallways, 4.2 million square feet of office space, It has its own L stop, and up until 2008, it actually had its own zip code. These days, though, it does share with its neighbors. At this point on the tour, we are making our first approach to Wolf Point. This is the location on the Chicago River where the north, south, and main branches of the river meet, and it is the historic center of the city of Chicago. Chicago was incorporated in 1833 as a wilderness outpost with a population of about 350 people. Over the course of the next 70 years, that population would expand to 1.7 million at the turn of the century, making Chicago one of the fastest growing cities in history. Wolf Point is the location of many firsts for Chicago, including the first church, the first hotel, and the first theater company. It was also, though, the location of the first tavern, the appropriately named Wolf Point Tavern, which was located on the West Bank, right about where that red sculpture sits today. That sculpture, by the way, is called Constellation and was designed by Spanish sculptor and architect Santiago Calatrava. Beyond that building is a contextuous building built in 2017 called River Point. Some think it looks like a stick of deodorant. One of my younger guests pointed out that it looks a lot like the sleeve of a Hot Pocket. So good luck on seeing that. The curve of the building mirrors the curve of the river, but this parabolic slice out of the bottom there is to prevent so that the building's supports do not interrupt the active train tracks that run beneath that plaza. We'll actually see a couple of examples over the course of the tour of how builders manage the available space along the river. As we head up the North Branch, we're actually going to see the oldest building that we'll see on the tour. It'll be up here on the left. It's this brick-colored blocky building up ahead here. This is Fulton House, originally constructed in 1898 as a cold storage facility. Between the Civil War and the 1920s, Chicago was the center of meat production in the U.S. Barges of meat would come up from the Union stockyards to the south to be frozen in buildings like Fulton House, before being loaded onto refrigerated train cars and shipped around the country. After decades of antitrust actions to decentralize meat production, Fulton House was closed, and in the 1970s it was converted into apartments by a man named Harry Weiss. The story goes that it took 6 months for the building to thaw completely, and when they cut through the 4-foot thick walls to the windows, they found them stuffed with coal and horsehair as insulation. So apologies to any vegans on the boat. Next door we've got the River Cottages, also designed by Harry Weiss. He was said to be an avid sailor. You can see that in some of the designs, including the round, almost porthole-style windows, as well as in the prominent use of triangles. Harry Weiss loved triangles, said to be inspired by the sails of his boats. The third townhome from the left last sold in 2015 for $2.25 million, in case anybody's out here shopping. Out here on the right, we've got this large industrial-looking building. This is actually a high-end fitness center called the East Bank Club. Their past membership includes Barack Obama, Oprah Winfrey, and Billie Jean King.
That's not work.
When the East Bank Club was completed in 1980, the river was still quite gross, and so buildings built along the river opted to face away from it. After extensive cleaning, however, as part of a beautification effort by then Mayor Richard N. Daley through the 90s, the river got a lot nicer and more residential buildings began to pop up, including the Kinsey Park townhomes to our left. These elegant brick townhomes were actually pre-sold by their completion in 2001 for between $1.6 million and $3 million apiece, illustrating the changing attitudes about riverside living in Chicago. Now at that price point, you certainly don't want somebody shouting into your living room at nearly 3 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. So I'm going to hop off the mic while we turn this boat around. Once we've concluded that turn, I'll hop back on and we'll head down to South Branch. In the meantime, it's important to stay happy and hydrated. Please visit a bar and visit an often. You can also flag me down if you have any questions. Thank you.
Yeah. Careful, I'm recording.
Well, we can meet Obama.
Maybe we can meet Obama. I want to play him in basketball.
It's probably $100 day pass.
100. Well, you think they have day passes at the gym?
I'm gonna look it up right now.
Further up, it'll reconnect with Lake Michigan. There's a right next to where the Baha'i temple is right there.
I wonder if those boats right there are part of the gym membership.
Probably.
Like if you're a gym member, I guess if we can get my mom to.
I bet it is.
Kind of like the rack lets you do the bikes.
It's $250 a month.
That's it. It's not too bad. If you get to,
It's not as bad as I thought.
I would sign up for 1 month if they let me take those kayaks out every day.
I bet they would, bro.
We could take it out to the lake. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of bugs out here.
Not at all.
Remember when I told you I was on the St. Joe River on a kayak? There's all these
That
insects.
road is really narrow at the bottom.
Yeah.
I have one question. Have you ever worked out at the East Bank Club? No, but I want to.
Oh, can you?
You get an impact? It's like a $500 application.
Are those kayaks part of your membership? That'd be cool.
Across the point here, we've got this building that gets very narrow at the bottom. This is 150 North Riverside. And the reason for its interesting shape is because of the limitations of the land that it sits on. For the back 2/3 of that lot with active underground Metra and Amtrak trains that run through there. And the front side is subject to a zoning law that requires a 30-foot setback for any buildings built along the Chicago River. This is to ensure that the riverfront remains open and accessible to the public. So this building's designers, a firm called Getch Partners, worked with a structural engineering firm out of Seattle, Washington, to design a building which redirects the weight or load of the building in onto a strong central core. The result is that this building's footprint is only 20% of the lot that it sits on. For those of you looking for photo opportunities, I really quickly want to call out that here to our left is a straight shot down the main bridge. Lots of beautiful buildings, great photo opportunity if you like that. Now, whenever you're building tall buildings, one thing that needs to be accounted for is something called drift. This is the tendency for buildings to sway in high-speed winds and elevation, which, by the way, should be considered a feature rather than a bug, because things that do not bend tend to break, and we don't want that happening with our high-rises. It is, though, something that can be minimized or mitigated, and the way that 150 North Riverside accomplishes this is with something called inertial slosh dampers. It's about to say, so I'll say it again. Inertial slosh dampers. There are 12 tanks on the top of that building, containing 160,000 gallons of water. When the wind pushes the building one way, the water sloshes back the other way, which helps to dampen that inertial force and keeps the building from moving too much on the wind. We'll actually discuss a couple more methods over the course of the tour of how builders manage drift. Up ahead on the left here, we've got this reflective building with the metal tripod legs out front. This is Bank of America Tower, and those metal tripod legs are this building's response to that 30-foot setback requirement. By vaulting the third floor into the air, they're able to maintain public access to the riverfront. Bank of America Tower cost $800 million to build. That's a lot of overdraft fees. And being that it was completed in 2020, they were able to incorporate a number of technologies that proved beneficial during the pandemic, including an app-controlled elevator. So you can call the elevator to your floor without having to interact with shared buttons, which is very neat. Except that I've heard one of the other tour guides say that there are no shared buttons, at which point inconvenience becomes my nightmare. There's nothing I hate more than when a company requires that I download their app. If it's a choice, I'll probably do it, but don't be. Beyond Washington Boulevard up ahead is an area of the river that me and the other docents like to call Art Deco Canyon because of the massive Art Deco buildings on either side.
Oh, Bowie.
We will discuss
Careful,
the
the building might fall
on
down.
the left on our return trip. But first, I want to direct your attention to 2 North Riverside Plaza out here on the right. Originally the Chicago Daily News building, it's one of the first skyscrapers in the world to include an open-air public plaza as part of its design, which also means it's the first building in Chicago to intentionally develop toward the river. It's an excellent example of Art Deco architecture with those long vertical lines, those deep inset windows, and that geometric ornamentation. This side of the building, though, also features bas-reliefs, or ornamental carvings, which highlight the history of journalism and provide a timeline of the written word from Egyptian hieroglyphs through the Gutenberg press. For our purposes, though, it also starts another timeline. And that's because this next section of the river is actually a pretty